G'day frothers, it's Will here from Flow Mountain Bike, and this is the 2022 Norco Sight VLT. Well, the Sight VLT has been a very popular model here in Australia, and to ensure that remains the case, Norco has not held back with this third generation model, which receives a ton of updates. So has Norco hit its competitors for 6 in this very hot e-mountain bike segment? We've been testing this bike for the past couple of months to find out.
Attention, all units on tactical alert. Everybody get ready, cause we have to go to work. Why? It's high noon, the moment of truth. Oh, deliberation and the burden of proof. So, cast your bets, will it pass the test? Blindfold in a cigarette. Last request. Better brace yourself, expect the worst. Listen to the bass and check the verse. I got rhymes in abundance, style over substance. If it's what you like, take the mic from a thumbprint. Coughing up some off the cup with the nut stuff to make them out top the rough. See, I'm about to rock this, open them up like locksmiths. Got to make believers of agnostics. I drop on a line that's not common. You'll see in the green, I'm the top prominent. Flip your wig, you know what I mean. Like a drag queen on a trampoline. Get it? I'm serious when I do, cause this is high noon, the moment of truth.
The new Norco Sight VLT arrives alongside the new Fluid VLT, which is the 130mm travel trail bike, and the Range VLT, which is the 170mm enduro bike. The Sight VLT splits the difference down the middle with 150mm of rear wheel travel. That's paired to 160mm travel fork and 29-inch wheels. Norco calls it an all-mountain e-MTB, and that puts it alongside competitors like the Trek Rail, the Specialized Levo, and the Merida E160. For 2022, the Norco Sight VLT gets a brand new frame. It's got a 4-bar suspension design, but the rear shock has now been flipped up to sit underneath the top tube. The mount has actually been twisted slightly, and that helps to angle the piggyback reservoir away from the frame in order to maintain clearance inside the main frame for a water bottle. In fact, if you go for a large or extra large frame size, you can actually fit 2 water bottles inside the main frame. And that's unusual on any big travel bike, let alone one with a battery and motor inside it. Of course, the new Sight VLT updates to the latest Shimano EP8 motor, but Norco has actually clocked the motor upwards, and that's allowed them to use this very long, straight, massively sized down tube to fit a suitably massive battery inside. Alongside the new VLT models, Norco has developed not 1, but 3 new battery options. There's a 540, a 720, and a 900 watt-hour option, the latter of which is the largest single battery on the e-mountain bike market that we're aware of. This is a really clever idea because it means every rider can choose the right size battery for their needs, and you can always upgrade to a bigger size battery down the line if you decide you need more range. The previous Norco Sight VLT was already very progressive in terms of its geometry, and the new model doesn't stray too far from that same recipe. We've got a slack 64-degree head angle, a very steep 77 to 78-degree seat tube angle, and reach measurements are long. On the large size we've been testing here, that measures in at 485mm. There is a bit of an eyebrow raise with the chainstay length on this bike. The previous Sight VLT was already very long in the back end, but this new model gets even longer. The rear center length on this bike is 462mm. That brings me to my next point, which is the fact that the Sight VLT is 29er specific. There is no geometry adjustment built into this frame to accommodate a smaller 27.5-inch rear wheel. Given how hot the mullet trend is in the e-mountain bike world, this does seem like a strange omission on Norco's behalf. There are 4 models in the Norco Sight VLT lineup. 2 of those will use carbon frames and the other 2 will use alloy frames. The bike that we've got here is the Norco Sight C2 VLT. It sits 1 step down from the top and it comes with the carbon fiber frame. It's been supplied to us with the huge 900 watt-hour battery option, and as mentioned before, it's built around the Shimano EP8 motor. In terms of suspension, we have a RockShox Lyric RC fork and a Super Deluxe shock with a Megneg air can. We've got a brilliant tyre combo here with a 2.5-inch Maxxis Assegai on the front and a 2.4-inch Maxxis Dissector on the rear, both of those using double down casings and 3C rubber. We've got a SRAM Eagle drivetrain with a mix of GX and NX components, Shimano MT520 brakes with 203mm rotors and metallic pads, which have been really powerful and consistent all through testing. We also have this clever Trans-X dropper post, which has 170mm of travel. It can actually be adjusted down by 30mm without tools, which is a useful feature for shorter legged riders who may be in between frame sizes. Confirmed weight for our test bike without pedals is 25.32 kilos, making this one of the heaviest e-mountain bikes we have ever tested. So what does the Norco Sight VLT do well? Given the substantial mass and the raked out geometry, it'll come as a surprise to no one that this bike has a ridiculous amount of stability. In fact, it's the most stable e-mountain bike in this category that we've ever ridden. But this bike is totally in its element when monster trucking down gnarly, wide open descents. The handling is so composed and so confident at speed, with a really solid feel through that beefy chassis. It's also really well balanced, with those long chain stays providing more even weight distribution, and you've got plenty of body weight naturally driving into the front tyre contact patch for more consistent grip. When I say more consistent grip, well, I mean most of the time anyway.
That's so good.
Did he save it? No, he didn't.
Shot right there. So far away when you start drifting there.
A quick shout out here for the SRAM Universal Derailleur hanger, which is designed to rotate backwards in the dropout when faced with an impact. It's a great design, and we can say it genuinely works. The suspension has also improved markedly on the new Sight VLT. It's got a very smooth and active feel to it, but it's now much more resistant to bottoming out, in part thanks to the addition of that Megneg air can. Along with the proven Lyric up front, the Sight VLT delivers fantastic suspension performance all round. It flutters over high-speed chops smoothly and comfortably, with excellent composure under hard braking. Along with the tough tyre casings and the sticky assegai up front, this bike really encourages you to charge into rough sections of trail with reckless abandon. As well as being more sure-footed on the descents, the new Norco Sight VLT is also a better climber than its predecessor. The long chainstays help to keep the front wheel planted as the gradient kicks up, and the steep seat tube angle puts you into a fantastic climbing position with no shuffling on the saddle necessary. The Shimano EP8 motor also delivers noticeably more power than the old E8000 motor. It's still not as powerful as the Bosch equivalent, and there's also less overrun from the EP8 motor, which is noticeable when you're ratcheting at the pedals on technical climbs. However, the motor's output is very intuitive and beautifully tuned, and that reduces the chance of rear wheel slip on traction-poor surfaces, even when you're starting from a standstill on a steep climb. And because this bike is so long, it's basically impossible to loop out, even when charging uphill on full boost. On the sort of sections that we'd be looping out on the Specialized Levo or the Merida E160, the Sight VLT just stays stuck to the ground. Indeed, the steeper and more technical the climb, the better the Sight VLT gets. As for the downsides of the Sight VLT, well, no doubt about it, this is one big bike. The dual 29-inch wheels and that enormous wheelbase mean it can be a bit of a handful on tight, slow and janky single track. The overall bulk is also noticeable on faster and flowier trails where the Sight VLT requires more upper body input in order to flip it over between alternating corners. It's certainly not impossible, it just requires a more active riding style. And with such an expanse between the grips and the rear axle, and the battery effectively playing the role of a 5-kilo kettlebell, it requires a lot of torque on the grips in order to lift up the front wheel. It can be coaxed into leaving the ground, and once airborne, it does maintain a very steady trajectory. But in general, goofing off and getting jibby on rollicking flow trails is not the Sight VLT's forte. Now, while tall riders are likely to appreciate the added stability and the improved weight distribution that comes from those longer chainstays, they may be a little more problematic for shorter riders. And this is because on the small and medium frame sizes, the reach measurement actually becomes shorter than the rear center length. This can do funky things to weight distribution, say on really steep descents, where you can actually have too much weight on the front wheel. For this reason, we'd love to see shorter chainstays on those smaller frame sizes, or perhaps even a dropout flip chip so that riders could choose between short and long settings. We'd also love to see the option of a mullet wheel setup on the Sight VLT because it's something we've really enjoyed on the Canyon Spectral On, the Merida E160 and the Specialized Levo. Going to a smaller 27.5-inch rear wheel not only gives shorter riders a little bit more arse clearance on really steep descents, it's also a really useful way to inject some agility and playfulness into what is otherwise a very heavy e-mountain bike. We also reckon that shorter chainstays or a mullet wheel setup would also help to better differentiate the Sight VLT from the Range VLT. As it stands, the geometry is quite similar between the two bikes, which is understandable because they do share the same frame. The Range VLT using a longer shock, a different linkage, and a longer fork to provide the increase in travel. With that huge 900 watt-hour battery, you might be wondering how much range can you get out of the Sight VLT? Well, I can tell you this bike racked up more range than any other e-mountain bike we've tested, and not by a small margin either. During our shuttle range test, the Sight VLT managed to rack up just shy of 2,500 meters of elevation gain before the battery ran flat. And that is absolutely huge. Now, to put that into perspective, the highest mountain in Australia, Mount Kosciuszko, stands 2,228 meters above sea level. That's right, folks. There is literally no mountain in this country that the Sight VLT won't be able to climb up. You can see the detailed results of that range test in the full review. Click the link in the video description below to see how the Sight VLT stacked up against the rest. So would we recommend the 900 watt-hour battery for every rider? Well, no, we wouldn't, because it's more expensive and it's also heavier. It puts more weight higher up in the frame and closer to the head tube. And as we've already discussed, that does have an impact on handling. And aside from the times that we went out to deliberately ride the battery flat, on most rides our bodies and our brains were giving up long before the battery did, in which case the 540 or 720 watt-hour battery option is likely going to be more suitable for more riders. Still, the big battery is kind of appealing in that it basically eliminates any range anxiety whatsoever. For everyday rides, you can just bang it into boost mode all the time, and depending on the length of your rides, you don't necessarily have to charge it up every single time, which is kind of appealing. On the note of charging, we have found the charge port door to be awkward to grasp and open up, and the battery can be tricky to install and remove due to the snug fit. The plastic shrouds surrounding the motor are pretty flimsy and seem unfinished, with some decent sized gaps there for mud and water to get into. The main bolt to secure the battery is also in prime position to get packed full of dirt. Keep an eye on that because Norco recommends that you check it before every ride to make sure it's tight. Now, we have spent a load of time on several of the Sight VLT's direct competitors, including the Trek Rail, the Specialized Levo, and the Merida E160. Now, all four of those bikes do share a lot of similarities on paper, but their performance on the trail is quite different. We've put together a detailed comparison between the Sight VLT and those three competitors, which you can read in the full review over at flowmountainbike.com. And that brings us to the verdict of the 2022 Norco Sight VLT. With this third generation model, Norco has successfully elevated the capability of its popular all-mountain e-MTB. Compared to its predecessors, the new Sight VLT is a more capable bike on really rough and rowdy high-speed descents, though thanks to the perky EP8 motor on the long rear end, it's more capable on steep and technical climbs too. And with the option to fit a whopping 900 watt-hour battery, it's capable of racking up even bigger rides with even more elevation gain than ever before. But in the process of adding in all of that extra capability, the new Sight VLT has moved quite far away from the original 27.5-inch version, which we loved so much back in 2019. This new iteration is not an inherently poppy or playful bike, and the long chainstays mean that shorter riders may find it a bit of a handful, especially because it's so heavy. Certainly for shorter riders or anyone who's chasing a more nimble ride quality, there are other mullet e-MTBs we'd recommend, like the Canyon Spectralon, the Specialized Levo, and the Merida E160. Still, there's no denying the outrageous traction, control, and stability that this bike delivers, and that means you can monster truck it through some seriously technical terrain. Certainly, if it's maximum all-day mileage you're after, and you love going fast and seeking out really challenging climbs and descents, then it doesn't get much more confidence-inspiring than this. Now, the full review of this bike is now live over at flowmountainbike.com. Make sure you click the link in the video description below. That will take you through to the full review of this bike right here. If you've got any questions for us about the Sight VLT, drop them into the comments below. And if you enjoyed this video, give us a thumbs up and make sure you subscribe to our YouTube channel if you haven't done so already. Otherwise, that's it from me, guys. I'm going to get out of here, and I'll see you next time. Tooroo!